Welcome. It's the Suzette Speaks show. We got some vibes early on. Appreciate you rocking with me. We got a little late start today, but God is good. Listen, God is so good. It's a Fire Friday. I just want to tell you how beautiful today is. If you haven't given your thanks to the Most High today, just take a moment and give thanks, please, and thank you. Because sometimes we forget how great it is and how grateful we should be for this life. There's so much going on. There's so much to discourage us from doing so. But we have to remember each and every breath we take is a gift. Each and every day we open our eyes is a gift. So we're going to start in that mode today. This is a Fire Friday. You're listening to Suzette Speaks live on your radio. Listen, I am on such a high vibration right now. I just want to take you there. If you're not there, if you're feeling low, if you're feeling discouraged, I know sometimes the week beats us up. And when we get to Friday, we don't feel like there's no more energy left. Honey, it is okay. We'll be all right. You're going to be okay. Actually, you're going to be more than all right. There's a fabulous weekend ahead waiting for you. There are some days of rest waiting for you. And we cannot be weary in well-doing. That's what the good book says. We're going to try to stay positive, keep our vibrations high, and remember to be thankful for even the problems, even what we have right now in front of us that is challenging us to keep a positive mindset. It is to teach us. That's what I've realized. It is to teach us something that we need to learn. So we're going to keep the positive vibrations high. I want to talk a little Black history. Of course, yesterday was Juneteenth. As you saw, or as I shared yesterday, many of you may have seen, if you were on the streets of South Florida, my heart was so full of all of the different celebrations from Miami up to Broward County, up to Palm Beach County, the history, the remembrances, the parades, the fashion shows, the step shows, the talks, all of the ways in which we chose in our community to honor the legacy of freedom, of emancipation. My heart is so full. I don't want anybody to take this thing called freedom for granted, because when we look at what's happening in our country, sometimes we think, oh, it will always be this way. No, it won't, because there were people that stood up generations before us to make sure that this very country lived up to its ideals. The divinely inspired Constitution that was written, that stated that all men were created equal. When it was written, many of us who now live here, many of us who are products of the soil here, who grew up here for generations to generations after being brought here in the European slave trade is what I want to call it, because the Atlantic didn't enslave anybody. Transatlantic is not really an accurate term, because it wasn't the Atlantic Ocean that brought us to these new worlds, to the Western Hemisphere. Nonetheless, among those folks, before they were enslaved, they had real and true identities. They were medicine men and women, our equivalent today of doctors and nurses. They were poets. They were chefs. They were navigators. They were farmers. They had many identities before they came into a place where all of those identities were, well, at least attempted to be washed away, so that they could become property and chattel slavery. I don't even like the word chattel, because people don't really understand. Just like you own a book, just like you own a chair, just like you own a piece of your shirt off your back, that was the same weight a whole human being's life was given because of the color of their skin. But yesterday we had the opportunity all throughout this great nation. Actually, my mind went to the question, would Donald Trump take away Juneteenth? Can Donald Trump take away Juneteenth? It ran across my mind yesterday. I'm not going to lie. But as I watched the celebrations from down south, deep south in Miami, to, places like North Miami, all throughout, I just thought to myself, how very fortunate we are to be our ancestors' wildest dreams, the people who stood up for us when they couldn't even conceive freedom for themselves. When I did my talk yesterday, I was so grateful to be invited to the Haitian American Democratic Club yesterday to share a few words and reflect on Juneteenth myself. And I was teaching. When I get into my mode, I'm a bit of a historian. And so, hello, everybody watching online. Shout out to my crew. Lulu, I see you. Lulu Jr., Jim Rockford. Hey, have a blessed day. David Hunt, how you doing? Zempo, Wagwan. I want to get into some more Black history because I think it's important. We just don't celebrate it here in February. It's supposed to be that we hopefully uplift our history any day and every day of the year, thinking about the sacrifices that were made and sometimes the rewriting of history that is trying to take place right now. We won't stand for that because, as I talked about yesterday in my chat, there are generations of people who paved the way for the freedom that we have now. Juneteenth, yes, we celebrated, which was the last day in the United States where enslaved people found out that they in fact were given freedom. Or did they earn it? I don't know. I kept hearing that they were given freedom, that the Emancipation Proclamation gave them freedom. Well, oftentimes it seems as if some of the freedom fighting, the people who sacrificed lives, sacrificed their blood, sweat, and tears, sacrificed their bodies so that others could be free, they're somehow left out of the history books. Hey, Nana, I see you online. Shout out to everybody watching on the app. And I don't want to go without mentioning a few of those names today. We're going to call those names. We're going to remember their contributions today. If you are an immigrant or come from an immigrant family, you're first generation, second generation, I found out as I was speaking to this fantastic group of people yesterday, a lot of times if you come to this country as an adult, you don't get the American history lessons that we all need to have. Especially as if we are people of color, we have to learn about the struggles of African Americans because they opened the door so that we could be here. And although we also in different countries respectively throughout South America, Brazil had a ferocious slave trade. Enslaved people were there in large numbers. Enslaved people went to Mexico. People don't know that in Mexico, over 1 million enslaved Africans were brought to Mexico to farm, to plant, to reap, to sow. Not only to the Americas, all throughout the Americas, but this was something that unfortunately was a dark part of our past that wasn't talked about very often, but now we're talking about it because we are trying to avoid any recurrence of such oppression. As we celebrated yesterday and even throughout this weekend, there's going to be a lot more Juneteenth. Don't worry, South Florida. If you didn't get to celebrate yesterday, don't worry. There are a lot more events even today, even on Saturday, even on Sunday. You can still celebrate freedom. The spirit of Juneteenth is not just for one day, although we are grateful for the opportunity to commemorate that day where 2.5 years after they were granted by law, we'll put it that way, they had fought by law when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. He signed it in 1862. It was supposed to go into effect January 1st, 1863. But the remaining enslaved people in Texas, almost 250,000 of them, 250,000 remained enslaved. 2.5 years later, people are saying nobody told them. Maybe, do you think the enslavers knew? You think the people who owned them knew? So-called owners of other human beings knew? Well, it wasn't until troops, 7,000 troops, under Major General George Granger, landed. Because if you have ever been to Galveston, Texas, this is where this happened. Juneteenth and the message of freedom happened in Texas. And if you've been to Galveston, it's a coastal city. At the time in 1865, it was the economic center of Texas, because remember, in that time, there was no real technology. A lot of people did business by boat, right? A lot of news made it here and there. People made it here and there, going up and down the Ohio River, up and down the Mississippi River, up and down the oceans. So the port cities were the main cities, right? That's why Chicago even is alongside the water. A lot of times, huge cities, especially in the central part of the United States, ended up being on a river. New Orleans being another one. Access to transportation. Well, when 7,000 troops pulled up to the port of Galveston, Texas, And I wanted to enlighten you because I spoke about it yesterday and some people didn't know. Did you know that Black people have fought in every single war in the United States? Every single war in the United States. From the Revolutionary War, when Crispus Attucks, the first person shot in the creation of the United States, Crispus Attucks, a Black man, the first person shot after the Boston Tea Party, when they said no taxation without representation, when America, which had been a part of the British colonies, decided, no, we don't want a king. We want to be our own people. We want to be free. Well, since 1776 and the inception of the United States, unfortunately, there was groups of people that did not inherit that freedom. They were still in a system of oppression, of racial segregation and degradation, where people were treated inhumanely and with constant fear of violence, called slavery. Well, on that Juneteenth in 1865, that was June 19th, yesterday, that we celebrated this anniversary. 160 years later, the 7,000 troops pulled up on Galveston, Texas. Now, if you could imagine, there are about 10,000 people in Galveston proper, and there were 7,000 Union soldiers, 4,000 of whom were Black, pulled up. And if you can only imagine being an enslaved person at that time, never having any power, because remember, slavery was about power and control over your body and power and control over your mind, constantly referencing you as being lower and not deserving of humane treatment. This is how people end up treating people subhumanly, because in their minds they have to create a narrative that you're not really human anyway. Look at you, look at your skin, you're not human. I don't have to treat you with dignity and love and respect. You're not human. Well, on that day, after the people had been watching and praying, Major General George Granger pulled up into the harbor on ship with 7,000 Union soldiers, 4,000 of them being Black men who had served in the Union Army. Did you know that during the Civil War, our nation's great war, the Great Divide between the North and the South, the battle to save the Union, the battle over slavery, that almost 180,000 Black men served during the Civil War in the United States Army, 19,000 Black men served in the United States Navy. Do you know that in the Civil War, that was 10% of the Union soldiers? 10% of the Union soldiers were Black, freedom fighters. 40,000 of that 180,000 lost their lives. 10,000 lost their lives in combat. And if you think back to the 1860s, there was not great medicine advancements. So a lot of times they couldn't treat people. There was no surgery. There was no anesthesia. There was no antibiotics, none of that. We were very good at taking lives at that time because advancements in making of guns and using gunpowder and things like that. But the medical side of fixing people, it had not caught up yet. So the Civil War still remains the deadliest war in United States history. 700,000 Americans died. 700,000 Americans. 40,000 of them were Black soldiers who had fought, 10,000, and 30,000 of those were through infection and disease. A lot of people died from infection and disease during that war. So we can't even really imagine, because you have to think, 1 million people died here in COVID, and the population of the United States wasn't as big. And 700,000 people died during the Civil War. That's more than every other war that we fought in combined. That's the cost. That's the stakes when it comes to freedom. We remember those soldiers. We remember that time. And we reflect on the cost of freedom. I have to take a quick break. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the freedom fighters that we left out of history. There's quite a few here from Miami, quite a few here from Fort Lauderdale, the people that had to wade in like a sit-in at a dinner counter. Remember when the restaurants by law were segregated? Black people were not allowed to be served. There were people who had to sit in restaurants and then submit themselves to violence as a result of it. Well, there was also segregation at the beaches. You see the pretty beach, Miami Beach? You see the beautiful beach in Fort Lauderdale? Black people were not allowed on the beach. And there were soldiers and freedom fighters, and I'm going to name some of them, in the 1950s that defied law. So I have a really deep reflection on, this idea that, well, it's the law. A lot of times we have to question what is written when it's not true, when it's not pure, when it's not uplifting of the people, when it doesn't forward and advance the cause of equality. Yes, it can be written in a book, but we have the right to question it. I'm going to get a little bit deeper. I'm going to talk more history. We're here live on the Suzette Speaks show. Don't go anywhere. We got a lot more right after this.
The Caribbean. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, X, TikTok, and YouTube.
Get ready for the biggest Caribbean music festival in history.
I'm feeling kind of, I'm feeling kind of spicy today. Feeling a little spicy. What's up? So I'm going to do a little Black history. I got to do a little bit Black history today. Hi, how are you doing? The Abix girl. Hey, Zempo. Good afternoon to you. Nana, what's up? Good afternoon to you. I'm trying to keep it, but I have the Black history spirit right now. So I got to talk a little bit more about what I discussed yesterday. It was well received. And I could talk Trump and I could talk Iran and I could talk some of this thing, but my spirit is not there right now. Today, my spirit is trying to get people to know their history. That's what my spirit is on. So I hope you're okay with that today. I think I'm going to do a little bit of Facebook. So if I click off of here, I'm going to go to Facebook and do Facebook Live. All right, y'all? I got my hot water. Nobody's in the studio today. It's crazy. Nobody's in the studio today. I'm trying to get a good angle from this camera here. That camera is the main one for me. Oh, you can see. Ay. You can see the bottom of that camera. Oh, that's a good angle. What's going on there? The thing is, Mikey did this in a weird way. I have two cameras, trying to fix them up to do different angles, but this one is too close to my face. He liked this camera angle, but it's like in my face, bro. Let me try this angle. Yeah, bro. This camera he put on this microphone, it's like a camera right on top of it. Bro, oh, it can't move. Ooh. Broski, how is that supposed to work, broski? That one is intense. This one is like directly in my face. I don't like it. I like the further one. Let me pull this down a little bit. Oh, this doesn't, it's going to get the mic anyway. Okay. I don't like that one. That one's in the back of my head. This one I'm going to try. Go a little bit further. Can you hear the music? I don't want to get copyright strike. Hey, Doug. Happy Friday. Hope you had a good Juneteenth. This one is not bad. What do I see? This right here is my mic. That one is not bad. That's not bad. I think I'm going to keep that angle. Oh, yeah. I'm going to keep that angle. You don't see, you see this mic. A little bit this way. All right. It's like you can't get the perfect angle. All right. Hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I got about 2 whole minutes of commercials. 00003. So that's what they're hearing. I'm going to talk a little Black history. That's where my mind is right now. From Mary McLeod Bethune to the first free Black settlement in Florida. That's never been in our, thank you, Doug. It has not been ever in our in our history books. So when I shared some of the facts about Fort Mose and some of these other places last night during my Juneteenth talk, a lot of people were surprised by it. So I figure if they don't know it, there must be some other people that don't know about this history. So I'm gonna teach about Fort Mose, and maybe I will do a little bit. Maybe I'll do 15 more minutes here, and then I'll do 15 minutes on Facebook Live about it. But I want people to know their Black history, especially in the first generation, second generation. Funny enough, Doug, when I finished my speech, which went swimmingly, I was so proud of myself, not in a kind of like ego way, but I'm thankful to God that the way I wanted to set up my speech yesterday, I talked about Juneteenth, a legacy still unfolding. And so during my speech, I talked about the different chapters of the Juneteenth story, and I compared and not really contrast. I did similarities between the freedom fighters that existed leading up to Juneteenth. So I started with the story of the freedom fighters here in Florida. The first free Black settlement in the Americas that was sanctioned by law was here in Florida in 1738. It's called Fort Mose. Freed Black men who ran away. Like, if slavery was so good, why was everybody running away? But anyway, I digress. They came from Georgia. They came from the South Carolina colonies. They came from all over. And once they reached Spanish Florida, because in the 1700s, Spain still controlled Florida, the Spanish government allowed them to maintain freedom as long as they converted to Catholicism. You know, it was big back then, the Catholic versus Protestant. I don't actually, was that before or after the schism? But anyway, they had to convert to Catholicism, and they had to promise to join the Spanish militia if they had to defend the Florida colony against the British. So they had to be ready to fight for Spain if they were called upon, and they had to convert to Catholicism. Otherwise, they could be freemen. And that settlement was right above, just north of St. Augustine, Florida, and it started with about 100 free Black men. And I spoke yesterday about the Saltwater Underground Railroad. Everybody thinks about the Underground Railroad going north, headed to the freedom of the Union States or the Northern States, or all the way to Canada. But people don't talk about the Saltwater Underground Railroad, which goes south. So anyway, we're gonna get popping. Here we go. Let me get popping.
We're representing for the Vice of the Caribbean, Jamaica and Fabian.
24 hours of the best Caribbean music. You're listening to WZPP,
The new 96.1
FM.
Yes.
It's Voice of Caribbean, 102.1 Shaggy on your dial, Wicked and Wild. I mean, know that. Yeah.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's the Suzette Speaks show. We are here on a Fire Friday doing a little bit of educational vibes today. Listen, I am on a high from my celebrations all over South Florida. I was in Miramar. I went to North Lauderdale. I came back down south to Miami. I was all over the place enjoying the festivities from yesterday's celebration of Juneteenth. Now, if you have not been able to enjoy any reflection or observation of Juneteenth, don't worry. The festivities continue right on through the weekend. So I invite you to look up, on Eventbrite or wherever, what's going on in your city and what's going on around the region, because Juneteenth celebrations have been going on since Monday, literally, and they'll culminate all throughout this weekend. So if you didn't get a chance to celebrate, here's your opportunity. I, for one, was telling you before the break, well, welcome. If this is your first time here, I'm Suzette Speaks. How you doing? I am one of the fabulous DJs and social commentators that come on here on the Voice of the Caribbean. Our programming normally around the midday hours. We try to bring you a little bit more talk shows like my own. And early in the week, shout out to former Mayor Dale Holness. He holds it down as well. And he came to support me yesterday when I spoke at the Juneteenth event where I was the keynote. So I was grateful. Thank you to everybody, first and foremost, that came out and supported. I really do appreciate it. I was telling my folks watching on YouTube, I was in a zone yesterday, and it came out. I thank God, because there's so many things that I wanted to talk about, that I wanted to touch on, because again, as immigrants, I think we have a duty to understand as much as we can the African American experience through the study of history. Sometimes we get the propaganda and not the truth. And as I was saying last night, and I wanted to share some more interesting Black history starting from right here in Florida. I was talking about Juneteenth and its inspiration as a beacon of hope for everyone, not just Black people, but for everyone, the importance of freedom and the importance of knowledge, because even as we are talking about how Juneteenth came about, freedom was there. Freedom existed under the Emancipation Proclamation, but it wasn't until they were informed by the Union soldiers that sailed into Galveston Bay and then told over 250,000 enslaved African people in Texas, 250,000 African people, descendants of folks brought from Africa to the Americas for the purpose of economic exploitation. They were notified then that they in fact were free. And I can only imagine, because you have to think about in that time period, that people had never ever seen a Black person in authority. Those who had grown up on, cotton plantations and sugar plantations and all the rest of the agricultural engines of the South that were powered by free Black labor. They had never seen at that time, and we're talking about the 1860s, 160 years ago, they had never seen a Black person in authority. So I can only imagine being an enslaved person, because we try to change the language. We weren't slaves, we were enslaved. We weren't slaves, we were human beings. We were carpenters, right? We were builders. We were farmers, because again, it's not by accident that they went for Africans to figure out how to maximize the return on the soil. It wasn't by accident that we were chosen. Nonetheless, or we were exploitedly chosen. I can only imagine what it must have been like to be an enslaved person who had been in this country for several generations, who the very identity of who you were being beaten out of you each and every day of your life, the subjugation that you experience each and every day of your life, trying to break your humanity each and every day of your life. When you first saw a Black man in a Union soldier's uniform walking towards you with a gun on his back, I can only imagine the shock and awe. When they say shock and awe, that's real shock and awe. And as I was teaching during my speech last night, I wanted to share with you some more facts about freedom days and freedom fighters throughout the region. Because yes, we celebrate Juneteenth, that's what happened in Texas, but there were many little steps, I call them little chapters of Juneteenth emancipation days that we were never taught about. And one of them being about Fort Mose here in Florida. Have you ever heard of Fort Mose? Last night I was asking people about what is the Underground Railroad. And when I said, where was the Underground Railroad? A couple people told me, yelled out, Georgia. And I was like, actually, and you know what I think they meant as I was thinking about it this morning? If you've ever taken a plane in the Atlanta airport and you have to go down to the plane train, I think is what they call it, down in the bottom of the airport. I was like, yeah, that's underground and it's a railroad. But when we talk about Black history, that's not what we mean when we say Underground Railroad. So we did a little teaching, and it's okay if you didn't know that the Underground Railroad was not a real railroad. First and foremost, it was a network of people, both enslaved, freemen, white folks as well, that helped escape enslaved people get to freedom, get up north, some as far as to Canada. And remember, the United States was not as developed. There was a lot more forest and marsh, and especially in Florida here, a lot of marshlands. I keep telling people South Florida was a swamp before we dredged it. It all looked like the Everglades, right? Before we found ways and we found plants that would suck up all the water so that we could build roads and houses and all that. It was swampland down here, man. But during the occupation of Florida by the Spaniards, before Florida became a state in the United States, when the 13 colonies existed, the 13 British colonies that had claimed territories here in the United States, Florida was still held by the Spanish. And we're talking about the 1730s. Well, at that time, the Spanish had allowed for what would become the first legal settlement of free black people in the territory of the United States. Now, we talk about Haiti and becoming the first black republic, the first nation state, the first country of black people born ever in the entire world, born of a revolt of enslaved people, fighting for 13 long years. Those were steps in the story of Juneteenth. We're not going to ignore. All of this was very much related, because even at the time, the slave holders were very afraid that the story of the Haitian Revolution would get to the enslaved people that they had here in the United States. Now, at the time of the Emancipation Proclamation, 4 million Africans lived here in the United States. 4 million people technically were set free by law, finally, in 1863, on January 1st, when the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. As I told you, because of the lack of communication at that time, it took 2.5 years for it to get all the way to Texas on Juneteenth, for the 250,000 enslaved Africans there in Texas to know, yes, you are free. As I told you, there were black soldiers in every single war fought in the United States, fought by the United States, and the Civil War was no exception. 10% of the Union troops were black. 180,000, nearly 180,000, some estimates I see 179,000. Black soldiers were a part of the Civil War. 40,000 of them died, 10,000 in combat, and 30,000 due to infection and disease, which was very common during the Civil War. Again, we didn't have medical advancements the way we know them today. And as I was talking about the real Underground Railroad, I asked people last night, did you ever hear of the Saltwater Underground Railroad? Because people think of enslaved people running or chasing freedom, leaving oppression and chasing freedom, going north. But there was also a saltwater underground railroad to right here in Florida and also into the Bahamas. Now, as I told you, Spain allowed free black men who had escaped the Georgia colony, and had escaped the South Carolina colonies or Virginia colony. All they had to do was get to Spanish Florida, Spanish-controlled Florida at the time. Spanish government required, the king required that they convert to Catholicism, as well as promise to join the Spanish militia if the British ever attacked. Now, if the British attacked, they had to fight for Spain. That was a requirement. Convert to Catholicism and be a part of the Spanish militia if they ever needed them. Well, that first settlement in 1738, I grew up in Florida. I went to all Florida schools. I had never heard of the story of Fort Mose. That was the first legally recognized black settlement of free blacks. And when I look, I say, well, I've never ever heard of it. Fort Mose, led by a black man named Captain Francisco Menendez. Remember, Spanish people held Florida for the king of Spain. So the enslaved Africans who became freemen took names reflecting of the culture, right, at the time of those who controlled Florida. So Francisco Menendez, Captain Francisco Menendez, led 100 free black men at Fort Mose. Freedom fighters. We recall them, we remember them, we honor them in the spirit of Juneteenth, because we hear about Juneteenth, but there were many other small steps, pebbles along the way of examples of people. Some of them we will never ever know. We will never be able to call their name. But this idea and the propaganda that people just went along with slavery. Oh, everybody was like a happy family. People were treated well. Don't fall for it. We look at the runaways, those captor bills, the posters, the wanted posters for runaways. They had a whole law created called the Fugitive Slave Act, which if people weren't happy, If they were happy, they wouldn't be running away to try to escape oppression and chase freedom. Through the Underground Railroad, through the Saltwater Underground Railroad, like I said, many freemen, with the help of Native Americans, came south to Florida. They went all the way through, some of them to the Bahamas. That's why we have such a very familiar exchange here in Florida, particularly South Florida. Bahamians built Miami. Coconut Grove was Bahamian. Bahamian families all the way up through Pompano. We remember Estelle Roll. That's the mom from Good Times. She grew up in Pompano. There are so many pockets of influence. Like I said, we are really a bridge to one another's freedom. We have to remember that. We share the common cause now, but common history of seeking liberty and justice for all, and hoping that one day this country would live up to its truest ideals, its truest self. A more perfect union where everyone's freedoms were honored. A lot of lessons that we can apply for today. I want to go over Fort Mose. I can't even get into Haiti, 1804, in the city of Gonaives. Jean-Jacques Dessalines finally declared Haiti a free nation. Another step in the Juneteenth story. Word of Haiti inspired many other countries. Like, wait a minute. What happened in Fort Mose inspired people, even though it's been written out of the history books. When we think about freedom fighters like Mary McLeod Bethune, in Florida we have a historically black college or a historically black university named for her. She did it by education. We have people like Harry T. Moore and his wife, Henrietta Moore. We call their names. They led the NAACP in North Florida. Harry T. Moore and his wife, Henrietta, they were bombed for registering black people to vote in Mims, Florida. Paid the ultimate sacrifice to get people registered, to desegregate schools. From Miami all the way going up, there were many freedom fighters who carried the spirit of Juneteenth with them. And we will recognize them and we will call their names, not just on Juneteenth. Every time we get an opportunity to, whether you do studies on Black history at your church, at your synagogue, at your mosque, whether you do studies for your own self, Google is free. Juneteenth for kids. One thing that did warm my heart yesterday, going to Miramar, just seeing all the moms and the grandmas and the grandpas and the dads too, with the little ones. The kids need to know. The kids need to know the history because we're informed by what happened even till today. It has an influence. History influences us even till right now. The disparity among people who are a part of this, American body politic. It just didn't happen magically. It's not because we just wanted it like this. It is a product of our history. And we ought to know our history because people who do not know their history are destined to repeat it. So as we see the rollback of freedoms that has been taking place, we have to ask ourselves, what can we learn from the Juneteenth spirit? What can we learn from the Juneteenth spirit? Whether we look back at Harry T. Moore, whether we look at Mary McLeod Bethune, whether we look at Francisco Menendez, whether we look at what happened in Texas on Juneteenth itself, there's so many powerful lessons that we can learn, that we must learn, that we must carry with us